Welcome to the MTC Report, the news behind the news with journalist Mark Taylor-Canfield. We offer you independent voices and underreported stories about topics you won't hear anywhere else. Join us as we delve into the deeper issues behind the news stories of the day on the MTC Report.
Why is Bernie Sanders so popular? Is it because he took on the big banks and the Wall Street billionaires who gave all the money to the 1% while outsourcing the poor and the middle class, leading to one of the greatest financial breakdowns in the history of the country and resulting in a massive bailout through the use of public funds? Is it because he supports free education at public colleges and universities, funded by a tax on Wall Street speculation for students who now spend most of their lives just trying to figure out how to pay back their enormous loans as most of their income flies out of the window and back into the hands of those same Wall Street bankers? Is it because Bernie opposes the wealthy corporate monopolies who practice disaster capitalism while buying the elections and spending billions of dollars developing dangerous fossil fuels and nuclear energy, causing many scientists to predict global climate change and scenarios involving major environmental devastation and, well, maybe even zombies? Is it because Bernie supports green technology projects and a clean, sustainable energy economy based on ecological concerns instead of uncontrolled greed, leading to a better environment for ourselves and for our children? Well, maybe that's why so many people around the country are now supporting Bernie Sanders.
Hi, this is Mark Taylor-Canfield for the MTC Report, reporting from Seattle. I'm here to talk to you about some things that the mainstream media probably will never tell you, including the fact that the United States has been ranked 41st in the world in terms of press freedom by Reporters Without Borders, which is an international advocacy group for journalists around the world. So in their 2017 World Press Freedom Index report, Reporters Without Borders cited things like not state-controlled media, but corporate-controlled media, and the monopoly of corporate-controlled media in the United States is one of the reasons why press freedom has suffered. So there's a certain amount of self-censorship that goes on when corporate media runs the establishment. So there you go, Reporters Without Borders. You can find them at rsf.org. Originally, they were founded in France, but you can find their website in English as well, and it talks about their report on countries all over the world, not just the United States. Of course, China and Russia have also ranked very low on that list, but the United States has slipped over the last 20 years or so, and is finally starting to improve a little bit, but there's a lot of problems with secrecy in government and in the inability of journalists to access information about the workings of their own government in the United States. So that's one factor that Reporters Without Borders cited. There's also this issue of no protection for whistleblowers in the United States. As a lot of people have reported, the Obama administration really cracked down on whistleblowers in an unprecedented way while he was in the White House. And there is no protection for sources for journalists. There is no blanket protection law in the United States, unlike other countries in Western Europe where reporters are protected from having to reveal their sources. In the United States, a journalist can be brought before the courts and forced to testify against a source, and if they refuse, they are held in contempt of court and go to jail. And that has happened many times in the United States, and is sort of, by the way, one of the pledges that most journalists have taken, which is that they would go to jail before revealing their sources. Confidentiality is one of the major tenets of journalism all over the world, and the Society of Professional Journalism Code of Ethics will talk to you about that. They will inform you about that. You must be willing to protect your sources. That's a major tenet of being a journalist, okay? But in the United States, there's no legal protection for that, so you could find yourself in jail. In my instance, in my experience, I actually came close to being subpoenaed during the court-martial trial of Lieutenant Aaron Watada, an officer in the U.S. military, in the Army, who refused to lead his soldiers into Iraq. He just sat down on the tarmac and refused to leave with the plane. Well, he was court-martialed and charged with behavior unbecoming an officer, amongst other things. And reporters who had interviewed him, including myself, were subpoenaed along the way. In most cases, the journalists refused to respond to a subpoena, and in this case, the Pentagon dropped those subpoenas. This was actually a military court of law that these journalists were being subpoenaed to testify before, which was also unprecedented. Lieutenant Watada was court-martialed. He was held in prison for a time and then released. And I was one of those journalists when I was working for the Pacifica Radio Network and Free Speech Radio News. I did interview Lieutenant Watada about his decision to refuse to go to war in Iraq. He was an official war resistor at that point. So those are one of the things that journalists come up against. The Committee to Protect Journalists, cpj.org, is a very good resource for journalists and for people looking for information about protecting freedom of the press, and the freedom of journalists to do their job. Of course, journalists are under threat all over the world. There are many journalists who have been arrested, hundreds. There are many who have been disappeared and murdered across the planet. And there has been an increase, unfortunately, in attacks on journalists over the last couple of decades in countries around the world. Democracy is under threat. Reporters Without Borders did a satirical advertising campaign last year in 2017 where they said, 2017, a great year for censorship, a great year for dictators. Because there's been so much of a crackdown on journalism and reporters around the country, or in this country, but also around the world, in places like Egypt, in Turkey, in China, in Russia, all over the world. There have been crackdowns on the rights of journalists, and this is usually done by regimes who do not want information about their regime to be released to the public, so they often use the police or the military to crack down on the journalists in those countries. In the United States, of course, we have the Trump administration, who is not friendly with the press corps and has very little respect for the media in this country. Now, yes, I admit that the corporate media in the United States has not done a good job at educating people about what's happening around the world and things that their own government is doing. That's why independent media is so important. But when the administration claims that the latest CNN or MSNBC report is, quote, fake news, that is usually because it disagrees with the official policy of the Trump administration. So this is a political response rather than a factual response, and we must keep that in mind. Always fact check, always try to make sure that you know where the information is coming from, and don't trust any source verbatim, right? Check it out. In journalism, we have this rule where everything should be verified at least 3 times before you report it, okay? One source is not enough to verify the information. So there you go. That's partly what it's like to be a journalist in the United States. Now, for those of you who don't know who I am, I've written at the Huffington Post. I also had an article published by the Seattle Times. I've had a regular column for several years at the Capitol Hill Times. I'm also a blogger at Daily Kos and at Blogger, that website, Blogger. The MTC blog is my blog there. And I also, of course, have this, the MTC report on YouTube. We have over 370 videos, original videos uploaded now to YouTube. So I want to thank everybody for supporting us and staying tuned to this broadcast. We're trying to do the best we can to do independent news reporting in the United States. And to mention some more independent news journalism, I should talk to you a little bit about Democracy Watch News, which is an organization that I am actually executive director for. Democracy Watch News is an international news service. It's a non-profit organization. It's not owned by any corporation. It doesn't accept money from any corporations at this point. And it's also dedicated to the coverage of pro-democracy movements around the planet, including here in the United States, where our editorial board strategy or decision or opinion is basically that we need a pro-democracy movement in the United States, a serious pro-democracy movement in the United States, to fight back against incursions against freedom of the press, to your right to privacy, and many other things that are happening in the United States that are tending towards an authoritarian style regime. So Democracy Watch News, by the way, recently was listed as one of the top 100 digital transformation influencers on the planet by a group called Analytica. That's Onala Lytica, Lytica, not Cambridge Analytica, which is a totally different group. We don't want to go there, but I can tell you that I did get some messages on my Facebook account lately saying that some of the folks who had communicated with me on Facebook had been compromised by the Cambridge Analytica hack, and therefore some of my profile information may have been released out there. So no surprise, right? Secrecy is almost unheard of in the United States. No matter how much encryption and how tight you are in your cybersecurity, it's very difficult not to have corporations and government agencies abscond with your information. Anything that's online is basically public at this point, folks. So I've said that before, and unfortunately that's true. So be careful what personal information you put online, because it's available to anybody who has that ability to hack into your system. So anyway, yes, Democracy Watch News is an international news organization. There are 9 regional bureaus that cover international news stories around the world, focusing on things like democracy around the planet and threats against democracy. So there you go. I've been doing a lot of journalism, and that's what a lot of people know me for. I'm a regular guest on the Jeff Santos show, broadcasting from Boston, from the Boston area. It can also be heard around the rest of the country at revolutionradionetwork.com and on WRRD out of Milwaukee. So every Sunday at noontime Pacific. Is it noon on the Pacific? I'll get back to you on that. But every Sunday, if you go to revolutionradio.net, you'll get the scoop on that. I think it's actually 2 to 4 or 1 to 4 on East Coast time. So whatever that is in the Pacific time zone, that's when you'll get it 3 hours earlier. But it's broadcast live at revolutionradionetwork.com. And also the Jeff Santos shows are archived at SoundCloud and at that website I just mentioned. So check it out. They've got great guests. Jeff Santos is probably the best progressive talk show host in the country. He's an amazing guy. He has sort of a blue-collar labor union background, and he's great at being a progressive populist. So if you know what I mean, it's a progressive person in terms of their politics, but somebody who's very inclusive and willing to talk to all sides. So there you go. Jeff Santos, broadcasting from Massachusetts, is one of the best progressive talk shows in the country, and that has some of the best guests you'll ever hear. Last week he had former Congressman Alan Grayson on there talking about how he passed and helped pass more legislation during his tenure in the US Congress than anyone since Bernie Sanders, the independent member of Congress, when he was a member of the House of Representatives. There's regular guests like Professor Robert Craig, who's director of Wisconsin Citizen Action, a progressive who's up against, folks like Scott Walker up there in Wisconsin, those Republican right-wingers. You've got Herb Boyd, another one of my favorite guests. He is a professor at City College in New York City, and he's also a writer and an editor at the New Amsterdam Times. So check out both of those guys, Robert Craig and Herb Boyd. They're both brilliant. They're amazing people, and mentors of mine, actually. I've been influenced by them quite a bit. They're great guys. So there you go. That's an insight into my journalism. I started doing the MTC report because I wanted to give an independent point of view out here on the web, in a way where I was not responsible for, any corporation or political party. This is a nonpartisan, independent program. I'm just trying to tell you the truth from my point of view as a journalist, and also musician. I'm in several bands, and I've been recording music quite a lot, especially recently. I'm also an actor. I play Nick Savage, Private Eye, in that series on YouTube, which is an audio radio theater style series. And we're also working on a film project as an adjunct to that. And also have ideas for a graphic novel and other projects associated with the Nick Savage Private Eye character, who is a private detective who lives in Seattle in 1947. So it's sort of a film noir style audio play. And if you go to my YouTube channel, you can check that out. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. I do. I blame my grandfather, who gave me his old Stetson fedora and turned me on to film noir movies from back in the 1940s, and then the radio plays like Orson Welles and The Shadow, and Philip Marlowe, Sam Spade, Johnny Dollar, Rocky Fortune. That's the character that Frank Sinatra played on the radio as a detective, or actually not as a detective, but a detective style character. That was Rocky Fortune. But there are a lot of others, really great radio plays that are dedicated to the private detective genre. And that has to do with some of the writers like Raymond Chandler, Mickey Spillane, Damon Runyon, and folks like that, who did some amazing writing in the detective novel genre, and then had a lot of their work adapted for radio. Beginning in the 1930s, but especially through the 1940s and 50s, it was the classic era of radio broadcasting. Radio was the form of entertainment in the country. It was what everybody gathered around every night, instead of your television or your computer screen or your handheld mobile device, as we do today.
Don't go anywhere. The MTC Report with Mark Taylor-Canfield continues next.
You feel as a parent when you know that your kid, who you love so much and you want better things than you had, that's the American dream, your kid can't afford to go to college, can't even find a home for himself or herself, or maybe leave school $50,000, $80,000 in debt. So I think President Carter is right. I think if you're going to look at human rights, we have got to look the term I use is the growth of oligarchy in America. That's right. That's it. Oligarchy. And what that means, and the president touched on both of the issues, it's not just an unbelievably grotesque level of income and wealth inequality. One family in America owns more wealth than the bottom 42%, etc. But these guys are not putting their money under their mattress. They are using it politically. So we live in a country where people fought and died for democracy, and you got the Koch brothers and Sheldon Adelson and a handful of billionaires able to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to elect candidates who will represent the wealthy and the powerful. And this recent bill, everybody is familiar with this terrible bill that was passed last Thursday in the House. The media describes it as a health care bill. It's not a health care bill. It is a bill designed to give $300 billion in tax breaks to the top 2% and hundreds of billions more to the drug companies and the insurance companies. So that's what you got. The rich get richer. They protect themselves politically. They get more tax breaks. The middle class shrinks. Some people in this country live in desperate poverty. And I think that has a lot to do in this country and internationally with a lot of what we are seeing today.
Yes.
Well, you sold me down the river. I passed to the shore. I said you sold me down the river. You don't want me no more. I said you sold me down the river. I passed to the shore. I said you sold me down the river. Cause you don't want me no more. I said you sold me down the river. You don't want me no more. Because you don't like my music, says it scratch and rip out. I said my songs are baby, then maybe you're the boo. Well, I tried to make you happy, but you just let me down. I tried to do my best for you, but you just left around. I gave you all my money, but you just wanted some more. I said I love you, honey, you just went into the door. Sold me down the river. Sold me down the river. You sold me down the river. I said you sold me down the river cause you don't want my loving anymore. You said you want me to stay home and help with the chores. I said, well, baby, I started to get bored. She took my favorite jacket and she chased my friends away, and now I'm here alone.
But I'm also a musician, so I don't talk too much about that, except on the Jeff Santos show. But I have been in several bands. I'm a member of the Galaxy Machine, and you can check out our popular music video called Harmony Wine, and that's on YouTube. Just look up Harmony Wine by the Galaxy Machine. It's a really kind of fun psychedelic music video that we put together for that song Harmony Wine, featuring lead singer Van Brown. Also, I've been in a group called Lucid, which involved several folks, including Dale Lloyd, who is now the proprietor of the And/Or record label in Seattle. He does a lot of experimental releases, a lot of very esoteric music on that label. But Lucid also recorded and released a bunch of music, and were on the playlist at KEXP at one point. And KEXP is a very famous, world famous radio station here in Seattle. Originally owned by Paul Allen and then turned over as a public radio station. It promotes a lot of local music and local bands from Seattle. Does a lot of free concerts. Every summer there's a free Friday concert series down underneath the Seattle Space Needle at the Mural Amphitheater. That's sponsored by KEXP. They do a lot of great work in town in promoting the Seattle music scene, Seattle music in general. So I've been in other groups as well, and lately I've been working with the Revel Saints, which is a group of folks who do kind of bluesy rock, bluesy hard rock, which is the style we've been working in. And some great studio musicians and music instructors actually recorded that music with me. And I want to thank those guys for doing such a great job. You can hear some of it on the Jeff Santos show when I do my weekly or bi-weekly report there on Sundays. And you can also check out my music at YouTube. I've got some music videos out there, including my recordings under the moniker DJ MTC. That's sobriquet. Yes, I record electronic music sampled with analog instruments, including lots of sort of dance style music and sort of sci-fi style music, and that's available on my SoundCloud channel, my SoundCloud site. So just go to DJ MTC at YouTube or go to my SoundCloud site under Mark Taylor-Canfield, and you can hear some of that music. You can also check out my stuff at Bandcamp and Reverb Nation. So there you go. I'm also a very busy musician. I perform a lot around Seattle especially, and currently involved in several recording projects, and then releasing actually a total of 3 full-length CDs at this point. I've reported on that before about some of the great clubs around Seattle, including Neumos, up on Capitol Hill, the Crocodile, the Showbox. There's some really great places to see music in Seattle where you can get up close and personal with the musicians while they're on stage, so it's really an intimate kind of setting, and it's really special. If you love music and you want to see your heroes on stage, Seattle is a great place to do that. So there you go. I've also done soundtrack music for films, and have performed live soundtrack music for silent films in Seattle quite often. It's one of the things that I like to do. But I'm sort of all over the place, and I'm sure you figured that out by now. If you put my name in any search engine, you'll find that I'm very busy with multimedia and with journalism and art in one way or another. I've also performed at a lot of Seattle art walks as a performance artist and musician and actor. And so I'm very interested in film these days, and so I've been pursuing that as well. And I also do a lot of animation, so sometimes you can find my cartoons up there at YouTube, including The Adventures of Bernie Sanders, which is a fan favorite. A lot of folks like that one. But also some satire involving U.S. politics. And I'm, writing several books. But I'm very focused on independent media and why that's so important. So that's part of what I wanted to talk to the audience about today is, first of all, thank you for checking out the MTC report and for supporting what I do here. I am just trying to be an independent voice with no corporate strings attached to me. I am not a puppet of anyone. I'm just trying to speak my own mind, which is rare these days. But thankfully, I do have a platform to do that with your support. And I am not proud of the state of U.S. journalism. As an American journalist, I am ashamed, actually, and embarrassed that we're ranked 41st in the world, that there's so much corporate control and censorship of the media in this country. Whether you're on the right or the left, that's true. This is not a partisan or political statement. It's just a statement of fact about where we're at in the United States in terms of our culture, in terms of our society, in terms of history. It's hard to get good information, and you can't really trust mainstream media. I'm sorry. It's owned, just like a lot of our politicians are owned. They're bought and sold as a commodity on the marketplace, sort of. That's how the media is as well, and everybody has a point of view. We've talked about this before in the MTC report about how everybody wants you to believe that their view of reality is ultimately the only one that's important, and they're looking for that priority. You can't trust everything you read, and you can't trust everything you see or hear. I invite you to double check everything that I say on this channel and to look into it for yourself, to be a proactive consumer and go out there and find the voices that seem authentic to you, that make sense to you, and that are trying to do the right thing by telling you the truth. Okay? Including yours truly here. I am a musician and an artist, so I have other ways of dealing with reality besides politics. It's not the only thing in my life, but it is an important part of what goes on, and it's one of the reasons why I do a lot of radio programs like the Tom Hartman Show or the Norman Goldman Show, the Mike Malloy Show. All great programs, by the way. I would also throw Nicole Sandler in there. People who have really great programs online, who are former radio talk show hosts, who were involved with the Air America network or Nova, and were basically kicked off the air at one point because they were just too progressive and too radical and too outrageous and too honest. So there you go. A shout out to Mike Malloy, Tom Hartman, Norman Goldman, Nicole Sandler, and all the rest of the folks out there that are trying to do a good job of giving independent voices to the public and doing what they do best. So I've done all of those shows, and I consider them all to be worthy of your attention. We really need some kind of an independent network where all of us can work together. I think that would be great. MSNBC is just not enough, okay? They have their own agenda. I love Rachel Maddow, but her hands are tied to some degree as well. We can't all be the outspoken independent voices that we need to be, because there's a lot of, let's face it, purse strings attached to what people are saying and who's getting paid what. in general, I have to tell you that the more someone is getting paid in the media, it's likely the less you can actually trust them. Maybe that's true of other professions as well, but it's certainly true of the media in my humble opinion. So anyway, there's some insight into what it's like to be me, a journalist, a musician, writer, actor, during these times, during these troubled times in the United States. And to be quite honest, I'm not happy with our loss of stature in the global community because of the current administration. I think there's a lot of incompetence and foolishness going on, a lot of statements being made that have not been well thought out, knee-jerk reactions which really are inappropriate. And regardless of your point of view, I think it's been a very lowbrow political dialogue lately, very undignified, very insulting. The language that's being used and the way that both parties are castigating each other and claiming each other are illegitimate. It's got to stop. I mean, we need a civil dialogue in this country. Democracy's not pretty. Of course, there's going to be dissension and people who disagree. I'm not saying that you should eliminate that ever. We need an open dialogue with diverse points of view. But it should be approached with some sense of dignity, right? And some respect. For the public and for the media and for the institutions that exist in this country. And right now, I think a lot of the statements that are coming out of the White House are not following best practices, let's say. They tend to be kind of unprofessional and emotional and are not helping the situation. They're not alleviating people's concerns. They're increasing their concerns. I know that the president sort of thrives on negative attention. He's not the only one, of course, in the media or in our culture who does that, who gets attention for acting out in that way. But he does need to rise above all of this and be an altruistic leader, an unbiased leader who can reach out to all people across the country. And he has said that himself, regardless of some of the impressions that he may have left with people. This is supposed to be a democratic republic, and we need to be true to those ideals. So it's up to each one of us to speak out about the injustices we see, to try to hold our elected representatives accountable and those that they appoint, and also to make sure that our own media and our own journalists and editors and publishers are held accountable for what they say and do, right? I mean, there is fake news out there. It's not just what people are saying to contradict the president. There is fake news, and it's paid for by corporations and special interests and sometimes nonprofits, to aid in propaganda campaigns, to try to convince the public that one way or another is the right way, and that one person or another person's or another group's interests are should supersede yours and everybody else's. I mean, that's the nature of politics and media. So I'm sorry, I don't mean to sound cynical, but I am a journalist and I've seen all sides of this situation. There are some good people in public service who have run for office and become elected. I think our Congresswoman from Washington State, Pramila Jayapal, is one example of a person who authentically wants to do the right thing, who got involved with politics, formerly being an activist, because she wants to see justice done. And that's very important. I think, she has a sense of how to reach out to the populace, to be a populist progressive, and to listen to her constituents and be responsive, and that's very important. Wouldn't it be amazing if elected representatives actually reached out to their constituents and explained to them the sordid details of what it's like, to be a member of Congress or to be a city council member or a mayor or a governor, and just explain to their own constituents in a very honest way, the way you would over dinner with someone. This is what it's like. These are the pressures that are on me. This is the distasteful part of my job. I have, party leadership calling me, asking me to raise more money for them. I have pressure from special interest groups telling me that they'll raise money to defeat me during my next campaign if I don't do what they want. There are many things about democracy which are not pretty and need to be cleaned up, by the way. There is an anti-corruption movement going on in this country. There is anticorruptionact.org. There's also represent.us, another website. And this is a movement to try to pass anti-corruption laws across the country, starting on the local level and then working up towards the national level, so that we can clean up the acts of, what's going on in Congress and in our own state houses, so that we can get the corrupt money out of there and get people elected who really want to do the business of the people instead of the corporations or special interests. I mean, this is a long-term problem, and whether you're on the left or the right, a Republican or Democrat or independent, I'm sure that you can see what I'm talking about. There is a sense that politicians are bought and paid for. And then many would argue that since the Citizens United decision by the US Supreme Court that says that money is free speech, now, as Jimmy Carter has said and Bernie Sanders and others, it's legal bribery. That's the political system in the United States now. So I'm not happy to say that. It doesn't please me to make these criticisms of the country I live in, the country I was born in. But here we are, and I have to face reality, and I have to be honest with you about what's really going on. Our democracy is facing a lot of challenges right now. We all need to be aware of that, and we need to stand for democracy and freedom of speech and freedom of the press and all the other freedoms, especially freedom to privacy in our persons and our papers. I mean, this idea that we can all be surveilled, that information can be, mined from us by corporations and government, that has to be reformed too. I mean, you can't have that, okay? That's not a free society. There needs to be accountability and transparency, and I'm going to keep saying that because that is the truth. So here at the MTC Report, we believe in democracy and freedom of speech and transparency and accountability for our elected leaders and for members of the media. Everybody has to be held to a higher standard, and we need to improve and dignify the dialogue that's happening in this country and just get it out of the gutter, because it's been so lowbrow and so insulting lately to anyone with intelligence or, self-respect, and we need to change that. So thanks for tuning in. Once again, this is Mark Taylor-Canfield for the MTC Report. Thanks for listening to my thoughts on this beautiful day in Seattle, and please tune in next time and subscribe to this channel if you haven't. Like this video if you appreciate what we're doing here, and please support independent media. It's very, very important at this time in our country that we give independent media voices a chance, and that we get away from the $300 haircuts and the $1,000 suits that represent corporate media and get down to some real journalism. Okay, this is Mark Taylor-Canfield for the MTC Report. I want to thank you for listening and tuning in today, and until next time, peace out.
Said you don't like my music, says it scraps and you went out. I said my songs are baby, then a me now. I gave you all my money, but you just wanted some more. I said I love you, honey, you just wanted to the door. Sold me down the river, sold me down the river. You sold me down the river. Baby said you sold me down the river, cause you don't want my loving anymore. You want me to stay home and help with the chores. I said, well, baby, I started to get bored. She took my favorite jacket and she chased my friends away. Now I'm here alone, I guess I'll stay. I said, well, how'd you have to cheat me out of everything I own? You took all my records and you kicked me out of my home. Well, baby, won't you take me back? I'm not so bad. In fact, I bet you, honey, I'm the best you ever had. I may not have a nickel or a fancy degree, but when it comes to loving, hey, you get the best of me. I said, I'll finally let you go now. I think I'm moving on, but I need to get my head straight. And he said that you're gone. You sold me down the river 'cause you don't want my loving anymore. I said you sold me down the river. It's a fast road to the shore. I said you sold me down the river. You don't want me anymore. Oh, well, you sold me down the river 'cause you do not want my loving anymore. Wow. I give you all my money, but you still wanted more. I said I love you, honey. You just wanted to the door. You wanted me to stay home and help you with the chores. And I said, baby, I think I'm getting bored. You took my favorite jacket, then you chased my friends away, and now I'm here all alone, and I'm alone. I guess I'll stay. Well, why'd you have to cheat me out of everything I own? You took my record collection and you kicked me out my home. So way down the river. That's right, I said you sold me down the river. I said you sold me down the river, you don't want my loving anymore. Yeah, well, you sold me down the river 'cause you don't want my loving anymore.